From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
The fresh faces of the General Assembly. This week, two incoming freshmen, one from the House, one from the Senate, talk ambitions, hopes, and fears as they start their legislative journey. Our guests on the first half of Newsmakers, State Senator-elect Ryan Pearson and State Representative-elect Joe Lombardi. Then, the dust has settled after the 2012 elections, but another sandstorm is already brewing. The pension fight and what it means to the political landscape. On the second half of Newsmakers, a political roundtable with Eyewitness News analyst Joe Fleming.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel this week, political reporter for Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And I want to congratulate both of you on your victories in November.
Thank you.
A note to our viewers at home, do not adjust your television sets. Joe Lombardi is under the weather, and that's why he sounds like that, but he was kind enough to join us on the program.
Thank you, Tim.
Just kind of a broad question to both of you. Your first year, you're no political rookie at all, but this is both your first years up at the General Assembly. Ryan, we'll start with you. If you could do one thing up there, be it pass a piece of legislation or kill one, what would it be? What's on the number one thing on your list of priorities?
Yeah, I think it's no surprise that, knocking on doors throughout the entire campaign season, the biggest thing that was important to Cumberland and Lincoln was our economic picture and jobs in our state, and we hear that over and over again. And so I think what we really need is a comprehensive look. We see all the studies. We're 49th. Forbes came out with theirs yesterday, 49th again. I think what we really need is some hard look at those indexes and trying to make sure we have the right regulatory reforms, working with the executive branch and business, hoping to make our state move up on those rankings. And I think that's probably our biggest number one priority as we go forward.
You want to take a look at that to see how you can improve those numbers. Do you have a thought, something concrete that might improve our standing?
Yeah, I think, you look at it, they're pretty broad measures, right? So they measure everything from the cost of labor to your regulatory environment to education. So I think you have to look at them all at one, but I think, specifically you have to look at the way in which our tax structure is set up for corporations. There were some thoughts in there about some of our insurance programs that we have at the state level that are unique to Rhode Island that I think we need to look at. So I don't think there's one big thing. I think there's a culmination of a lot of things that will really end up being a large package that we have to put forward to make the state more competitive.
John, top priority?
Yes, apparently the Senator's been looking at my notes, and that's good. But all kidding aside, he's absolutely right. As it go door to door, the economy and jobs, certainly a lot of discussion about 38 studios and how we could have utilized that $75 million. That's very important. But what I'm finding already, Tim, is there's really a lack of communication. Even within, just on the House side. For example, there was an election for leadership. Not one of the people that ran for office asked me for my support. So if that's problematic, I think we need to be coordinating amongst the various branches of government. But in addition, as the Senator suggested, I think the business community, and we need to look at the nonprofits and see how we can all work on this together.
Since you brought that up, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but you were one of a handful of Democrats who did not go to the caucus meeting, and therefore you did not vote for House Speaker Gordon Fox leadership. Is that correct?
Well, Tim, this is not a vote. That was not a vote for Tim.
Meaning support, vote of support.
Okay, but once again, I think the way it worked for me for my 26 years in the legislature was if I were running for a particular position, whether it be President Pro Tem, President Majority Leader, Deputy Majority Leader, I think you need to give the courtesy of the other 74 members, asking them for their support, and quite frankly, that didn't happen.
Are you worried that this might hamper your ability to get things done up there?
No, Tim, I think you and I know that this is about collaborating, consolidating, communicating, and I think I do that very well. I'm not above, I don't have the ego. In order for us to be successful, we need to leave our egos outside the door and work on this together. This is a problem these are some systemic problems that we have to deal with. Obviously, we'll be working together. Hopefully, there'll be room for discussion and honest and open discussion.
Are you both of you satisfied with leadership? Sorry, in leadership right now? But Ryan, Senate President Teresa Pipelweed?
Yeah, I mean, they've both been very open. Both the president and Leader Ruggiero have been very open, asked for my support, and happily in the caucuses I supported them. And they've been great so far. The orientation in, really helping us to settle in. So far, so good.
John, you mentioned 38 studios. What do you think the General Assembly should do to push for accountability in the aftermath of that disaster?
Well, Ian, obviously there should be some oversight. It defies logic not to have some kind of oversight.
You support oversight hearings?
Oh, absolutely. I was the attorney for Senate oversight, and I'm not talking about a criminal investigation. That's not our purview. That's ongoing.
Do you support the state's lawsuit against a series of defendants on 38 studios?
Absolutely. I think the taxpayers should not be paying for that.
Ryan, same questions to you. Do you support oversight hearings on 38 studios, and do you support the state's lawsuit?
Yeah, both I think we do. And also, on the other side of that, I think it goes into a larger conversation of what's our structure going to be going forward. You both know that RIPEC came out with a study about the future of the EDC and how we structure our economic. And when you read that study, the 120-page it is, it does not lay out a clear picture or clear strategy or vision. So to your other question too, that's one specific thing that I think we have to get right as the legislature going forward is what's our strategy.
But on 38 studios, the Colonel of State Police has said, look, we'd rather let us do our job and then you guys can do whatever hearings you want. So the real decision that you guys may have to make on the 38 studios decision is, should we default on the loan? The $75 million loan guarantee, which could cost up to $102 million. Former Governor Don Carcieri sat in the studio. He said we should consider it. He's a banker. And so did House Speaker Gordon Fox. We should consider defaulting. Should we default? John?
Sure, it's something we have to think about, but based on all the facts. I mean, we need to have all those facts presented. That's why we need the oversight. Where did we fail? How can we do better? Why did this happen? Why did this not happen? Why was there no oversight? What are the rules and regulations? I think that's something we have to consider.
Ryan?
I think it is something we have to consider, but I think we also have to make sure that I'm looking for the Treasurer to really take some leadership here. We have to consider what that will do in our bond markets across the board.
She's been very clear that she has concerns that would affect the bond market. We should point out you work for Citizens Bank, right?
I do.
Any irony there and someone considering defaulting on a loan?
Not really, and I don't think it should have much impact in my role as a legislator.
Okay. Ryan, a labor-backed group used a mailer against the opponent that you beat, Bethany Mora, that faulted her for expanding the loan program that helped bring 38 studios to Rhode Island. That was very disingenuous because Bethany Mora was not in the General Assembly at the time when that vote took place. Do you think they're appropriate disincentives in place to keep special interest groups from spreading those kind of lies?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly was not happy with the mailer either. I thought we ran a campaign that was really focused on a lot of facts that were very relevant. So when I saw it, I was probably just as equal as angry. I think that that's certainly something that they should be held to a standard to of, if you're going to be putting out mailers, you certainly want to make sure that they're accurate and that they portray what's going on.
Another labor-related question. One of the pet issues for labor is expanding binding arbitration. Where do you stand on that?
I think we have to, there's both sides have, end contract continuation forever or no contract exists unilateral, and that we have to find a middle ground to get there. I'm not convinced that the binding arbitration bills that have been in the past are the solution, but we do have to find an end to this or we're going to keep coming back to it every year.
How about you, John? Where do you stand on expanding binding arbitration?
Again, it's something that I would consider. You always need to negotiate, you always need those tools available to you. I think that the governor, for example, the mayor of Providence, and several other individuals talked about negotiating. Look, 99% of all lawsuits are settled prior to the eventual hearing on the merits and judgment by your peers. So I think binding arbitration has its place, but obviously we need to see what the specifics are.
You may have inadvertently brought up an important topic, and that is negotiation, and how that plays with pension reform. Governor Lincoln Chafee's gotten some heat for suggesting negotiations, although the unions agree with him. Gina Raimondo is saying, no, let's not do it. Where do you stand? Should the state negotiate with the unions while pension reform works its way through the courts?
It's certainly the best avenue, Tim. I mean, this is what I do for a living. It's all about negotiating, especially at this time of year. And you saw that Mayor Tavares, I think, did a Herculean job with the public safety component of the unions. Just last night, the cops voted overwhelmingly to support the negotiated contract.
Ryan, what do you think? Negotiation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that negotiation is always good. As a former school committee member, we have to do it all the time. But I think that I honestly believe there's a little bit of politics going on and posturing going on. But anything that we do think about, the treasurer should be involved, General Assembly leadership should be involved. And if the governor is serious about negotiations, I think that's where the parties he has to bring in as well.
John, I wanted you had brought up what was going on in Providence, and you are very plugged in with the complexities of that city. And as you point out yesterday, the police officers voted overwhelmingly to go along with the deal. But Ted Nisi filed a report that there might be some cold feet in the local 1033, the union that represents the municipal workers. What are you hearing? Is there trouble afoot, or are the waters pretty calm in Providence in terms of the pension deal that was worked out?
Well, I think the question is how much of a deficit is there, and has the city met their obligation? They were supposed to be fully funding the pension obligation. Are they doing that? And my question is, I think the question that's out there, and this is the only thing that I've heard, Tim, is that whether or not that's a deal breaker. That there was a mutuality of assent, there was an agreement, and that's not happening now. So I think once we can ferret that out, I think we'll be okay.
That's a trust issue then from the unions, you think?
Yeah, I mean, as you see it now, from what I read, and I don't know if it's true, the firemen may have to re-vote on this because
there were some
language complications. So,
speaking of Providence, John, if Mayor Tavares runs for a different office in 2014, will we see you running for mayor?
Certainly something that I would consider. I can't leave it out. I mean, there's so many names right now, Ian, that, but right now I have a duty, as I was recently elected as the state representative, representing people of, which extend beyond the 13th ward, what I represented for 26 years. And we always leave those doors open. But I think there's a lot to be done in the General Assembly, and hopefully I'll be a fresh face, and someone's going to ask questions about how we can do this and do it better.
Well, one thing you might want to ask about is how the budget for the General Assembly has increased by $10 million over the last decade. Is that appropriate in a time of austerity like we're living in now?
No, I think this is about collaborating and consolidating and communicating, and that obviously has not happened. And one of the things I hope I can do is have people do that. Is to communicate better.
Ryan, is that appropriate that the legislative budget has grown by $10 million over the last decade?
Yeah, I think we're asking a lot from our state agencies that directly impact so many Rhode Islanders that the legislature has a self-authority. We have to be policing ourselves and ensuring we're cutting spending where we can as well.
Where do you think money should be cut?
I'm honestly not that familiar with the legislative budget yet, but I think that we have to take a look at across the board in the state around a lot of our vendor payments and contracts that we have with outside bodies.
One of the big issues this year will be same-sex marriage. I believe you're a supporter of that. What do you think will be the linchpin here in terms of whether or not the Senate, which has been the main obstacle, will support that?
Yeah. I think the Speaker has called for an early vote, and I certainly hope that the Senate will quickly follow with that. An early vote would be ideal. Let's, deal with the issue. And I think, you've seen enough legislators that it may be possible in the Senate. Myself, Senator Cool Rumsey, and some others that have been elected, I think, can move it forward.
How do you feel about same-sex marriage?
What I've said from the beginning, Tim, is I want to see the legislation. My understanding is that what's really getting the attention of many of these senators and reps, my understanding, and again, I'm not on the inside, is that making it a voter initiative, that let it go to the people, let them vote up or down on it.
That's what you would like to see?
I think that's what's happening.
But what do you want to see? Not what's happening.
I need to see the legislation, Tim. I haven't seen the legislation.
All right. There's been some talk recently.
I would support that if you're asking me that.
Okay. There's been some talk about shortening the legislative session from 6 months down to 3 months. Where are the two of you on that, Ryan?
I think that the legislature deals with a lot of complex problems that we already condense into a part-time schedule and a part-time methodology. I don't see how you can do it. I think there's a lot of work to get done, and I think that'd be really hard to do in 3 months.
What do you think?
Well, I respectfully disagree with that opinion. I think those late night shenanigans in June is exactly what we have to get away from. Those bills should be submitted to us in a timely fashion. We should be able to review them. There should be a lot of discussion in committee, and not have the rancor and acrimony that the House has vis-a-vis the Senate side. The Senate does it right. They do it within committee, but that late night wrangling in June is not the way to go, Tim.
Are you concerned that that could shift more power to the executive branch by shortening the legislative session?
No, I mean, my reading of the Constitution and the rules, the legislative branch obviously holds the strength in the purse strings, and when you hold the purse strings, you hold the power.
All right, Ryan, I got to ask you, you're a young man, 24 years old. How did you convince voters to overlook your age? And some people would equate that to inexperience.
Yeah, I mean, I get that a lot, obviously, especially when you go around, senior centers and other high rises. And I explain it pretty easily. I said, I'm going to be living in this state for a long time, so I have a vested interest in 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And I think it's time for my generation to begin taking leadership roles, whether it be in government, business, nonprofits. We have to be part of the solution going forward. We have the most at stake. We'll be here the longest. And I personally won't accept the mantra of, oh, it's Rhode Island, it's okay for us to be last. And I don't think my generation should either. We need to be, and you guys need to help as well, as as Rhode Islanders, we need to be pushing an agenda that it's not okay to be last.
All right, gentlemen, I really appreciate you coming on the program. And John, especially when you're under the weather, you came on. So
Tim, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Congratulations to both of you. We had State Senator-elect Ryan Pearson from Cumberland and State Representative-elect Joe Lombardi from Providence. When we come back, a political roundtable with political analyst Joe Fleming. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. I'm joined today by Rhode Island Public Radio political reporter Ian Donis, and to my left is Eyewitness News political analyst Joe Fleming, and we're going to be chatting a little bit about politics. As I pointed out in the open, that sort of the dust has settled, but a new sandstorm is brewing over pension reform, and that everything has political ramifications. A snowstorm has political ramifications in Rhode Island. This week was sort of a tough week, gentlemen, for General Treasurer Gina Raimondo. She got some heavy press, most notably on Thursday, 2 top-of-the-fold stories on the front page of the Providence Journal about her travel, and a story about a Houston billionaire contributing 6 figures to Engage Rhode Island. That's a pension reform group supported by Raimondo. Then there was this protest by firefighters at a Raimondo fundraiser. I wonder what you guys make of all of it, and if this, do you think, is her first real political test? She was clearly tested on a policy level when she was pushing ahead championing the Pension Reform Act. But what did you make of this week for her?
Politically, this is the first time we're starting to see negatives on Gina Raimondo. However, it's very early. She has time to rebound from these types of things, and the voters right now will not remember this down the road. It's going to be up to her opponents to bring these issues back forward about her travel, make this an issue during the campaign. Again, depending whether she has a Democratic primary or a general election if she runs for governor. These could become major issues down the road, but it's still very early at this point. Meaning
the potential campaign opponents are recording
absolutely.
and clipping the Providence Journal.
These are all being taken care of by her opponents, by the unions, people looking at all this saying, can we use this against her down the road? Is it going to have any impact with the voters? Or do the voters not care about the fact that a billionaire basically from Texas contributed money to Engage Rhode Island? That might not be an issue, but her travel might be an issue. I'm sure possible opponents will be polling these issues to find out which one they could use against her.
Ian, I wanted to ask you about the Engage Rhode Island story. I think it first broke in the Wall Street Journal, and then it got picked up around here. All right, so a rich guy donated to Engage Rhode Island. Rich people can do whatever they want with their money, all right? But why does this rub people the wrong way?
Raimondo has emerged as one of Rhode Island's most popular politicians because she's seen as a problem solver, a pragmatic person who's kind of beyond ideology and focused in a pragmatic way on serious problems like the state's public pension program. Engage Rhode Island, which was formed with her support to lobby for the pension overhaul, does not legally have to disclose its donors, but it has certainly emerged as a player. And when you have a guy who's connected to Enron contributing more than $100,000 and less than somewhere between $100,000 and $500,000 to influence public policy in Rhode Island, that really raises questions about who is behind these things, and there's been a lack of disclosure about that. I asked Raimondo on this show about whether she supports disclosure. She defended how it's not legally required, but I think due to the influence of Engage Rhode Island. There are people who believe it would be in the public interest for that group to disclose its donors.
It's never the crime, it's a cover-up. Not that it was a crime, but meaning the transparency is the issue.
And that's what the opponents can use against her. That Engage Rhode Island is basically a creation of hers, and in turn, they're not saying who is supporting this group. And it's showing, as you said, nothing illegal, but it gives an impression that she's trying to hide something. Right. And that's what her opponents will try to do with her.
And that also contradicts her kind of narrative as someone who's about good government and transparency and that kind of thing.
Governor Chafee upset the unions early on. They felt he went back on his word when he signed the pension reform into law. But now, they're praising him because he's calling for negotiations as it works its way through the courts. Then there's Mayor Angel Taveras, who is the union's praise for negotiating with labor. Who are they cozying up to, do you think, Joe?
I think at this point, the mayor of Providence has the best shot with the union support. I think the unions still have a major problem with Lincoln Chafee. They feel he has lied to them. They have a problem with Gina Raimondo because of the pension. She never lied to them saying she wasn't going to do it. But Angel Taveras has been able to get pension reform in the city of Providence by negotiating, which was the union said they wanted. Now he's come out saying, let's negotiate the state. He's putting himself in a good position to get their support for a Democratic primary. And keep in mind, in a Democratic primary, labor in Rhode Island is very, very powerful. And that's support the mayor would really like to have if he's going to run for governor.
But, I interviewed NEA Rhode Island leader Robert Walsh last week, I believe. And, he was, again, praising Governor Chafee. Now, certainly the unions were scorned, but could you see the unions supporting Chafee again in 14?
I think it would depend who's running against Chafee at that point, who the Republican is, who the Democratic candidate is. But I think they'll be very hard-pressed to support Lincoln Chafee after he went back on his word to the unions. And not just on pensions, on binding arbitration also. So there's been two stances where they thought they had support, they didn't have it. So I think a lot of rank and file members would have a lot of problems going with the governor.
All right, predictions don't amount to very much, 2 years out, and so we're not going to play that game. But let's just look at what the potential ballot could be here. Let's run down some names for governor in 2014. Joe, we already know Ernest Del Monte has thrown his hat into the ring. We got Gina Raimondo, we got Mayor Taveras. The moderate party has to put someone in if they want to stay alive. Ken Block could be on that ballot. Lincoln Chafee, we've heard Cranston Mayor Alan Fung. Who are we missing? What about Brendan Doherty?
I think Brendan Doherty is certainly part of the conversation. He has said things to the effect that he would defer to some of the other Republicans whose names have been out first. But I think he could potentially be a serious Republican gubernatorial candidate. He will be more familiar to voters after his congressional run against David Cicilline. And we've seen Rhode Islanders, despite the struggles of Republicans in the General Assembly, Rhode Islanders have been willing to elect Republican governors. And I think there's a thought that GOP governors can be a check on the Democratic General Assembly.
And it also helps that it's an off year.
It's an off year election, will help them greatly. It also now includes the second congressional district, which is less Democratic than the first. Plus, Brendan Doherty has the ability to raise money. He showed that running for Congress. So he could be a very formidable candidate for the Republicans. Plus, you're going to have Lincoln Chafee. The one group that he does show some support with is Democratic voters. If he could draw some Democratic votes away from the Democratic candidate, that could put Brendan Doherty or the Republican in a very strong position to win the governorship.
To come back to Gina Raimondo for a second, she's become a real media darling, and a lot of people have really anointed her as the next governor, even though she has not obviously announced a campaign. But it's worth remembering that a lot of frontrunners in gubernatorial races going back many years, Frank Caprio in 2010, Sheldon Whitehouse in 2002, have not made the cut when the voters went to vote.
You mentioned 2002, and as Tim likes to give me a hard time about, back then you had Tony Pires in the race, if I remember correctly, and he drew like 22% of the vote, and that helped Meredith York become the Democratic nominee that year.
What I give you a hard time about is some of the older references to the 60s and 70s in the political landscape, not 2002. And back to Mayor Fung, interesting that he too, a lot like Mayor Taveras, worked it out, or is working it out, at least negotiating with the unions, though he did call for, he's up at the State House trying to get some of the tools on the municipal level, but in the end he negotiated.
Again, if he decides to run for governor, it puts him in a stronger position with the unions. If the candidates are Lincoln Chafee, Gina Raimondo, and Mayor Fung, the unions look at this and say, well, at least Fung's willing to talk with us. We have an inroad with Fung. Maybe we'll go with Fung, or maybe we'll stay out of the race and let our local unions decide who they want to support on their own. So he's being very smart in some ways, looking forward to 2014.
One of the hot races, and I laugh because hot races and Secretary of State usually don't go together, but that could line up to be a pretty interesting race. Who are we looking at?
Well, right now you're looking at a lot of people. Representative Deborah Giro, Senator Jamie Doyle, Terry Hassett, and the list goes on and on.
Providence City Councilman Catherine Taylor.
Yes, Catherine Taylor, Republicans thinking about running.
Ramel, Edwin Pacheco, the state Democratic chairman. I'd be surprised if he doesn't run. And it's kind of a cast of thousands for not the most high-profile office in Rhode Island. But I think Pacheco obviously is a former state rep, knows how to run the ground game. D. Ramel is a guy from Newport with a lot of money.
Well, I think D. Ramel, obviously with the money, really gives him a big advantage. And he can get his name recognition out there rather quickly because of all the money he has. I would think the field would dwindle down to maybe 2 or maybe 3 Democrats in the end.
You have to remember, Taylor ran a surprisingly good race against Mollis, even though she entered in the race early. All right, 30 seconds left. The quick yes or no sort of thing here. Jack Reed up in 2014, is he safe?
Yes, very safe.
And we don't see anyone waiting in the wings.
I don't see anybody running against him that's going to be very strong.
We heard this week Chuck Hagel is likely the next defense secretary. It's like we've said all along, Jack Reed wants to stay in the Senate. He's got a very safe seat.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Joe Fleming, our Eyewitness News political analyst, and from Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Check his blog out on Politics. It's a must read. I want to thank you for watching. I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers with